So Sherry, I unmuted, but I can't hear you.
I
There
did
you are.
mute myself. That is the first mistake of this session. It hopefully will not happen again, but I want to say welcome to everyone who didn't read the captions. Um, to our March 2024 edition of our Q&A. We have some exciting news, but we also had a bunch of questions that were pre-submitted. So way to go, everybody. We've got some really, really good questions. And Cindy, I didn't know if you wanted to start off with the information that dropped the end of last week.
Yes, I would. And give me 1 second because I want to pull it up to make sure I have it verbatim. Um, Ever since we started doing this format of live Q&A, we've seen periodic questions related to therapy and medication management. And we know that it's a multifaceted issue, and we know that there are already a couple questions in the queue for today that relate to medication issues, particularly around therapy. Anytime we've talked about it and we get to that point about medication reconciliation or doing a drug regimen review, we know that there have been some concerns and some clear, what apparently felt like clear guidelines, as many of our listeners would chime in on the chat box or reach out to me later, that doesn't in the conditions of participation, doesn't it say that you have to have a nurse involved with the drug regimen review process? And technically, the language was not in the actual COP. It was found in the interpretive guidelines for surveyors. And that got added when they updated the COP several years back. And I know many therapists, including our former partner, Dee Cornetti, was quite outraged about the guideline appearing to supersede or overreach what the COP actually said. And so efforts were made by the American Physical Therapy Association, the home health section, now Academy of that group. I was involved with some of that, and it didn't seem to move at all. It was kind of pushed down as that's not really an issue, it's not a big deal. Then COVID happened, and then it all ground to a halt with respect to making any revisions. Honestly, I find it frustrating, but it kind of fell down the list behind value-based purchasing and PDGM and all this other stuff. And lo and behold, kind of unsuspected by many, the updated interpretive guidelines dropped at the beginning of this week. And it was like, oh, okay, so we see that some major entities like the National Association of Home Care is going to do a webinar soon in the summary of this. And I'm like, I want to look through it. I'm curious. So a lot of them were, cleanup updates, and a lot of the red language is about, other allowed provider to try to reconcile some of those updates since the original COPs were changed. But there, buried near the bottom, was new language around this issue of the drug regimen review. And as I've watched other outlets and other people, yet we got to find out, I don't see a lot of, oh my gosh, did anybody see this? Other than me telling Sherry, not only did you see this, we need to blast this, and I want to make sure it's part of our next Q&A. So in order for this not to be remotely seen as a Cindy Krafft interpretation, I'm going to read the paragraph out loud for those of you who haven't looked at it, because this is a game changer. So interpretive guidelines for 484.55C5, the patient's clinical record should identify all medications that the patient is taking, both prescription and non-prescription, example, over-the-counter drugs or remedies and other alternative treatments that could affect drug therapy, as well as the dose, route, frequency, or time of administration when indicated on the prescription order. Okay, that's old news. We know that that had to be there. That's not different. The skilled professional performing the comprehensive assessment should consider, and the clinical record should document, that the skilled professional considered each medication the patient is currently taking for possible side effects and the list of medications in its entirety for possible drug interactions. Okay, that's not the surprise there. We know what that is, but they're referring to the skilled professional. It goes on. Each agency must determine the capabilities of current staff members to perform comprehensive assessments, considering professional standards or practice acts specific to the state. No specific discipline is identified as exclusively able to perform the medication review. Sherry, I'm reading it again. No specific discipline is identified as exclusively able to perform the medication review. However, only registered nurses, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech-language pathologists are qualified to perform comprehensive assessments. See also 484.55B. While only the assessing clinician is responsible for accurately completing and signing a comprehensive assessment, the agency may develop a policy where clinicians may collaborate to collect data for all OASIS items. For example, to assess potential side effects and drug interactions, the agency may wish to have RNs or practical vocational nurses, as defined in 484.115, review the medication list. Home health agencies should have policies that guide staff in the event that there is a concern identified with a patient medication that should be reported to the physician or lab practitioner. So this, what was before that went with the, you basically have to have a nurse involved in this process, is no more and is effective immediately. This was not put out there as a comment period or a suggestion. They're ramping up about 30 days for it to, permeate out there to the surveyors. But from an agency perspective, if we felt, that with that rule, I have to have a nurse doing all of these, now you don't. Now, you may say this process works well. I want to keep it. Clearly, the interpretive guidelines say that you may have that process. You may keep the process. But this idea that only nurses can do that drug regimen review is no longer how the interpretive guideline reads. So, but I like, Sherry, how it includes that it's up to the agency to assess competence. So it's much like everything else. We got to get we got to deal with if it ever says you always or never can do something, then we have hard and fast boundaries. But when there is, yes, other disciplines can participate, it's still on the onus of the agency to make sure that these individuals are truly competent to do so. And their level of competence is not just about, my discipline. That, I've decided that a nurse is automatically competent and an OT is immediately not, or the entire profession is or is not. We are going to have to look at, especially if you want to make a change based on this, that says, I do have therapists that are competent here. Just assessing people's competence or moving them closer toward that within that COP is something we can pursue. So when I saw it, like I said, I let Sherry know. I'm like, oh my gosh, please read this. Make sure I'm not reading it wrong. But that is a big win. And a lot of people put a lot of effort to try to get this fixed sooner, but they heard it. It just took longer than it probably should have to fix it. So I know, as I said, that's come up in this platform before. How could we do that given what the COP say? Now it's fixed.
And Cindy, it's kind of ironic that we got a couple questions in the week preceding this coming out,
Yep.
and I was able to talk to Dee Cornetti. And one of the things that she shared with me was 5 years ago, they went to the Federated State Boards of Physical Therapy, which is basically the entity that guides all the state associations for physical therapy. And they presented the option, what they thought should happen with physical therapists and medication management and how integral it was to what therapists do. And the Federated Board said, absolutely, we agree with you 100%.
Mm-hmm.
However, it had no teeth. It had no bearing on the practice of home health because home health had not stated anything about it. So it took 5 years for
Yep.
this to get done. And it's interesting, there's an expression in the South, and those of you that are on here are in the South, and the therapists that are on here, and I know the nurses that are on here, you do know that when you put this out to your staff, that you're going to have a bunch of your therapists clutch their pearls. They are going to be upset. They're going to be, oh my goodness, what in the world has happened to us? Well, the same thing happened when MoonVax came out. The same thing happened when other technologies have happened in home health. You have people that are very, very good at this, and you have people that are not good at this. I know as a PTA, I actually took a class on pharmacology. It was one of the ones that was a part of my curriculum. I know that a lot of physical therapists that are going to school now and that have recently graduated, pharmacology was built in to their curriculum. But you're going to have those therapists that clutch their pearls and say, "Oh my goodness, this is the big one, Elizabeth." That was a Sanford and Son reference. They're just going to really have a tough time trying to make sure that they understand this, but more than anything, it's more work for them. And so they're going to get upset. So I think building a competency around this
Yep.
and building an agency policy around this is so crucial. And you know, invite those therapists that are most upset about it to be on that committee in your agency when you're building those things, and do the education, because the more people that are educated in medication, the less medication errors that are going to occur, the less medication interactions that are going to occur, and the less expensive any of those interactions are going to be to your agency. So I think that it's time for us to circle the wagons and grab those outliers and bring them in. And so I think, you know, Cindy, you couldn't have done a better job introducing that, but that was kind of a sea change. And so that was why we led with that today.
Well, and to clarify, because I had a question just typed in directed to me, and I want to talk about it from the group. So does this mean that we do not have to have a nurse review the medication profile if the therapist is competent? The answer is, yeah, you do not have to anymore, but it is hinging on the competent part. And so to your point, Sherry, there may be some pearl clutching, but there also could be a smaller agency that says, we've got this down to a well-oiled process. You know, the therapist does it, the nurse looks at it, you know, it's a good double check. Do I have to change it? No, you don't. That's what I like about the interpretive guideline, gives you the may option versus the should or have to boundary. So it allows us to look at our team, look at our processes, what makes more sense, what is the better way to do this, but through that lens of ensuring somebody's competent. Because you would never recommend, you know, hey, I went to this Q&A thing and Cindy and Sherry said, you know, effective tomorrow, the therapists just do all their own. That could be a patient safety issue, not a pearl clutching. It could be, I've been out of the loop. I may have been hired into your agency and never done it because it was already set up for nursing to do it. I wouldn't want anybody to just say, well, you get to start doing it tomorrow. I'd want to make sure I know how to do it correctly and that I understand. And just brief, Sherry, I found my little tip with this that's worked very well is we need to clarify that what we're doing is essentially screening their medications. Now, you may say that's a semantic issue. Why are you saying that? Because I have found as a therapist and talking to many other therapists, when you ask me to assess something, assessment means that I'm going to look for a problem and I am responsible for it if I find it. So when you talk about, you know, assessment or assessing medications, I think part of the block we've had for years has been, so you're saying I'm going to go through their medicine and if I find a problem, I have to fix it. And you're thinking, no, that's not what I said. The word screening can really drop the temperature in those discussions to say what we're doing is we're looking for potential side effects. We're using technology for interactions. The importance of this is when you find this, and thus the interpretive guideline talks about agency policy to handle when you find something, is you're going to alert the appropriate people to make those changes. This never implied that an OT was going to tell a patient to stop taking a medication or tell them to increase a dose. That does not come from the clinician. Nurses don't tell them that either. The issue is I need to alert the physician with a clinically significant medication issue, back to that OASIS item, and it's an urgent thing and I need a response, but I'm not the one who's going to start rearranging their pills or telling them to do stuff differently. So that word screening seems to help put it in its proper context, as opposed to this, oh my gosh, you've asked me to be in charge of their medications and do all this and I'm going to, you know, kill somebody. That's not really what you're asking them to do.
And it goes to our first couple of questions, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
We got a couple of questions, and I always put the questions in the chat so you guys can read along. So here's the first two questions, and they're about filling a pill planner, and the second one is about assisting a patient in setting their plan. So it's interesting that these two questions came in. And Cindy, do you mind addressing this? One of our PTs was asked by a patient to help them refill their med planner. The PT stated it was not in their scope of practice and deferred to nursing. In the past, our OTs have used this as a part of their plan of care for cognition and fine motor control. This to me is not a skilled medication management issue. What do you say, Cindy Krafft?
So I think what we have to do is kind of frame it the way Oasis does. And no, not because I'm an Oasis junkie, but bear with me, Sherry. We have one question that's about clinically significant medication issues. So this is where we address duplicates, side effects. They don't have the money to get the medicine. They're refusing to take the medicine. They're incredibly confused about this medication profile. Anything that reaches the level where I do want to alert the physician or designee right away, because this is a problem. This is an urgent issue. When we look at the other medication question, the oral medication management question, for example, that in order to be successful, the patient needs to know what to take and when to take it. But as far as duplicate side effects interact, that's not in that question. That question focuses on the physical and cognitive ability to get right dose, right time, every time. That question is not connected to adverse drug reactions. That's something else. So when we look at the question as written about help them refill the pill planner, is that changing anything about their medication? No, I'm not rearranging it. I'm not doing doses. I'm not doing a drug regimen review. If there is a clearly laid out what goes in what box, could I, as a therapist, technically put that in there? I would say from a task perspective, and it's all laid out, I could, I didn't say should, because I want us to be careful here. My question is, that question immediately went to an OT example. And that's where I see more of this becoming part of a skilled plan. Because a PT putting pills in the box coming off of a list, I don't believe that activity itself would be considered skilled physical therapy intervention. Any different than if I'm out there doing my PT and their dressing fell off and I put a new one on. That dressing change is not my skill. I have to be doing other therapy things. It just so happens, since I'm not paid per visit or by procedure code, I can do some of those things that nurses do as part of this visit. So if it was a straightforward laid out, I think I would err on the side that they could, but I would be more inclined to say, why can't this patient do it? And if OT is already in, let's let them know this request was made. Or do we need to bring OT in? Because putting pills in the boxes, they should be able to do that.
Mhm.
And if they can't, let's figure out why that is and if there's a therapy intervention to assist it. But a strict PT was there, nothing fine motor. Hey, can you put the pills in my pill planner? Feels like, okay, why can't you? Let's figure out how to fix that. And if it's a clear-cut plan and I do it as part of why I'm there, it doesn't present a risk. Does that make sense, Sherry?
100%. And adding a skilled service on top of that, i.e. having them
Right.
stand to do it, having them use an assistive device if they need to access where the pills are located, all those kinds of things could make that a skilled intervention.
Yes.
But
Mhm.
you have to be abreast of the fact that if it's not that fine motor that is mentioned in the first question that OT is working on, that you need to see if there's something else that like Cindy said, identify what it is that's keeping them from doing it. Is it a vision thing? Is it a lighting thing in the
Right.
home? There's a number of things that it could be, but as far as doing that as a task to assist the patient and be part of your home health agency's customer service, absolutely they can look at what dose that's supposed to be at what time of day, if they have an AM and PM planner, those kinds of things. But I would definitely also communicate that with the occupational therapist if they're in on the case, and obviously with the nurse that's involved with the case.
But I think also that pill planner issue of why can't they fill it? Monitoring a pill planner by all disciplines can be an integral part of effective medication management. Because sometimes I swear the most informed member of the team about what's really going on is the home health aide.
Yes.
And they're, oh, well, I was there to do the shower and it's Wednesday and Tuesday afternoon's pills are sitting right there in the box. They weren't taken. Now, we're not going to have the home health aide roll up their sleeves and start some sort of medication education, but they should be telling the nurse, the therapist on the team, hey, the pills are there from yesterday. They haven't been taking them. Because we know those issues can land you in the hospital. So the pill planner monitoring and have you actually taken it, or are you noticing? my example, Sherry, was always when therapists say, I have nothing to do with their medication, I'm not touching a pill bottle or else I'll explode. I've said, so how many times have you gotten someone up to do a mobility task and a pill hits the floor?
It's
So
someone is
whatever pill it is, it hit the floor. So it wasn't in your body. Did you drop it in the chair while you were sitting here? Did you not take this because you forgot about it? I mean, those elements are the practical piece of medication management that we really, if we turn a blind eye to it, puts patients at risk.
And Cindy, someone asked if you could go over some examples of when a patient is a 3 versus a 2 for M2020 for the med administration.
Okay.
That seems to fit right in here.
That does fit in there because the issue of the oral med management and the injectable, they have a similar tiering of the responses. So think about it this way: to be a 0, a 1, or a 2, this patient has a mechanism in place, right dose, right time, every time. They're error-free. The only way I'm discerning between a 0, 1, or 2 is to look at it and say, so what are they? Are they completely independent? Are they having someone set it up for them in advance? Is someone giving them reminders? So if they're getting reminders, and with these reminders, they are getting every oral med, every dose, right time, no mistakes, period, hands down, bulletproof process, then I'm picking a 0, 1, or 2. If a patient has missed a dose, they are not getting all doses, right dose, right time. And the guidance takes us to that is in fact response 3. And I know this opens up frustration about, but the patient lives alone and no, they don't need someone to hand them the pill, but okay, they get reminders, but they're messing up anyway. So response 2 doesn't work for reminders because the reminders are not 100% effective. And then when you throw the pill planner in it as well, you say the guidance does give us specific examples here, particularly in that situation where you got there, the pill planner was either messed up or non-existent. And so as part of that admission visit, the pill planner was straightened out or the pill planner was implemented. It says we are under no obligation to pick the pill planner answer unless we're convinced it's 100% effective. So if we, based on our comprehensive assessment, suspect that, yes, we put a pill planner, this is great, I'm still not sure that this is going to be bulletproof, then I don't have to pick the pill planner answer. I can pick the one where they need to have it administered by somebody else. So I think the tricky issue of scoring that item has also been complicated by medication issues are serious problems. We know this. And so when we see a messed up pill planner, when we see a system that isn't working, we immediately intervene to improve the situation, which we should absolutely do. Please, please, people have said, Cindy Krafft said, don't do any interventions on the admission visit. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying when I go to score OASIS, I have to score baseline. What they would have done if I had not come today, what they were doing the 24 hours preceding with function. So if I go in there and reorganize your pill planner, I go in there and move the pills closer to you, I go in there and adjust your walker for a functional issue, and then I pick an answer that says how good you are, I just totally killed my ability to show the value of my intervention. So yes, I'm going to intervene and do something to try to fix this medication, but my baseline answer is what you would have kept doing if I didn't come today. So all those pills you had in a candy dish and you were making mistakes left and right by your recent hospitalizations, yeah, you're a 3. By the time we left, we had a pill planner and it looked good. I'm not putting the pill planner answer because that was because I showed up today, not what you already had going on.
And Cindy, that goes directly into our next question. Are you reading ahead? I think you might be reading. I wanted to let people have the opportunity. I'm putting QR codes onto these slides so that you can just hold up your camera to it and get to directly to the information that we're talking about. This QR code that's up there now has to do with our last newsletter that had this information in it, and it had the survey set, the new survey set with the ton of red ink on it in it, so you can access that form using this QR code. The next thing I want to talk about is we have a couple. This is the next question. We have a couple of patients or a couple of clinicians who score the OASIS at start of care on what the patient can do by the end of the visit. For example, the client wants to stand at the sink to complete grooming and is unsafe. The clinician tells them to sit and they can complete safety. So they score them a 1. We have tried explaining the OASIS should be scored prior to the intervention being provided, but the rebuttal is the time frame for the consideration is the 24 hours preceding the time spent in home. Do you have any guidance or written materials to help educate on scoring prior to education or intervention, or is it accurate on how the client is doing by the time the clinician leaves the home?
So think about it this way. Those questions that talk about, what during the assessment or during the assessment and a previous time frame. It's talking about during the assessment. It doesn't say during the treatment of the problem. Assessment, they're just saying, what did you learn as you assess this patient? And if there's a previous time frame about what occurred within that previous time frame. So this may sound like wordsmithing, just like saying, screening instead of assessment. But the reality is it's talking about what did you learn about their capabilities during this visit and potentially that time frame prior. So it is not, once I complete an assessment and say there's a problem, that is how I do an intervention. I have to identify the problem and then I intervene. OASIS is asking you, what did you assess and learn, not what did you do about it?
Mhm.
So you do not score it after you've changed everything, because if you've done several interventions and it's significantly better and those are the answers you pick, what you're really telling CMS is they were that good when the door opened. They were doing that before I met them. So if you think about an outcome measure, I'm supposed to show what you were doing on your own compared to what you do after we've helped you. So the baseline has to be what they do on normally for themselves. But if I intervene in that visit, I've already said, oh, they're this good already. And now showing any improvement becomes nearly impossible depending on the question. So it's not a gaming issue. It's talking about during your assessment and the previous time frame, not the treatments you may have provided based on that assessment.
And Cindy, we had another question come in about the medication, and I don't want to skip over it because I think it's a good clarification. If a patient is independent in taking meds and the caregiver sets up a pitcher of water next to them to take the meds because they need supervision to ambulate to obtain the water, are they a 1 or a 2 or a 3 on 2020?
Okay, so I know we don't want to consume all the time on this, but first of all, we have to address the elephant in the room in that question, Sherry, which is this tying of a mobility issue. They're always 3. I still hear this, that we even hear this in our outsource side. A client will say, anybody with a mobility issue is automatically a 3 in med management. There is nothing in the guidance that says it's an always. It suggests that in order to be successful with your medicine, it's what to take, when to take it, and how do you get it. And a mobility issue or a pain issue or a memory issue can cause me to make an error. So the issue is if I go out and there's a mobility problem, and that mobility problem means you're missing doses because you can't effectively get to them at a certain time to take it, then absolutely you've made a mistake and a 3 makes sense. So now we're saying this patient has a mobility issue. I moved the pitcher. The issue isn't the pitcher. The issue is, were they error-free before you move the pitcher? So did I move the pitcher because, yep, they're a little unsteady and we'd all feel better right now if grandma could reach the pitcher instead of go to the kitchen? Okay. Was grandma making medication medication errors before the pitcher moved? Well, no, she was getting all right dose, right time. This is just more convenient. Well, then, no, you would pick the answer of her ability as a 0, 1, or 2 based on how she was doing that. The mobility issue doesn't strong arm you to a 3. So if I moved the pitcher and I've corrected it, now she's not going to miss the doses because the pitcher's here and she can get it. Pill planner's here, pitcher's here. She doesn't have to get up. I fixed it. You've made an intervention. So we're back to the same issue as before. If I've changed the environment to make it more conducive, that's skilled care. What was it that made you do it? If you did all this because they were making mistakes and this should fix it, then the baseline is 3. If they had a mobility issue, they already knew about it. That's why the pills were there and the water is just a bit more convenient, but I was 100% accurate before, then I would not be picking a 3.
That sounds like a good answer. Okay, next question. This is for the GGs. With focus on GG items and the activity not attempted responses, do we have any information on how a response of 07 versus a response of 10 will impact the algorithm to determine the discharge functional score?
Okay, two short version responses here, because we could open up this can of worms and spend the next 2 hours if you get me riled up, Sherry. So I will focus. One, we're seeing more information coming out because we're headed toward 2025 in the GGs about how the math is going to work. And I'm happy to, and they're making some adjustments and what's the most current. They have to disclose all of this because the vendors also have to be able to get all set up for that. And so there are links, and Sherry, I can send you the link with respect to that. And we can share this with the group with the recording or whatever. But some of us are like, that's interesting, but I really don't want to go the rabbit hole of all the technicalities of the math. If you're into that, you can find it, you can read it. But the issue of the ANAs, being part of that technical expert panel, some of the frustration is that if you look at the numbers, if you're trying to measure a difference, somebody started out of 4, they end up a 6. Well, then you can take 6 minus 4 and say it's 2. We see everything go 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When you get to the ANAs, there's a whole different number system. You got 8 8s, you got 0 9s. These just don't go with the flow of the above. So you can't really take an 0 9 minus something versus an 8 8 to try to figure out what the measurable difference is. What I've learned through seeing what they've been doing with skilled nursing facilities and inpatient rehab, the people at the front end of this train, is that they take all of those and recalculate the math. So all of them end up basically the same mathematical computation. Now, the can of worms is, we all know, hold up. Environmental limitation is different than a patient refusal, is different than you can't do it before and you can't do it now, versus you couldn't do it yet before. I mean, these aren't the same issues. Right, but they're trying to do math. So they're trying to push all the ANAs to basically one numerical value to then be able to calculate for differences. So yes, it's perfectly fine if we ever want to dedicate maybe a podcast, Sherry, or something about that. But the ANAs are there. They're not removing them. Mathematically, they're trying to push them to one value. But my last piece, Sherry, is I want just a quick cautionary tale. I know many agencies are putting a lot more focus now on the GGs because they know what's coming in 2025 with value-based purchasing. But I caution, because I'm getting questions now that basically are, we've got to get rid of all the ANAs. We've got to pick different answers. We don't want ANAs anymore. Hold up. CMS has literally years worth of data on us about how we've been scoring all the GGs all the time, day in, day out. So they have our baseline. I'm concerned if all of a sudden, now that they've said 2025, that nobody can roll, nobody can stand up, and no ANAs are in sight. Because that is going to look like we've manipulated the data yet again. ANAs should really be a last resort. They should not be the, I don't want to deal with this, I don't want to ask them, I just use these and put a whole bunch of refused instead. We really should be using them as last resort. But to say that I'm never going to have a patient who's an 09, can't do it now, couldn't do it before, or can't do it now, but could do it before. I just caution between some of the rumblings I'm hearing of now ANAs are all bad and we got to get rid of them.
And I'm going to echo what you said. If we start changing our practice and how we're gathering that data, other than to make it accurate, we're going to look at, once again, like an industry that's trying to game things for monetary gain. And that's something that we have to stop doing in this industry, or else we're going to continue to be told by MedPAC that we need to get a revenue cut.
So before we leave Oasis in function, a person already put this in the chat box, so they must be reading ahead and beat me to it. Some of you who are loyal listeners to this are aware of the saga of 1860 and my attempt to get resolution. Yes, I submitted that question in December. I got you'll hear in 5 to 10 business days, or if there's a backlog. When we met 2 months ago, I still had no answer. I had repeatedly sent it back. Then Sherry and I became aware that there have been some issues with our email addresses getting boinked off to spam or junk. So I thought, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I am going to resubmit my question through the K&K email. So it's consistently, excuse me, it's been 3 months, can someone answer me? And then go through my personal email, cut and paste the exact same thing and with context and say, okay, what happens now? I did find out that on my personal email, I once again got the 5 to 10 business days or so. I'm like, okay, I'll be willing to say maybe the email gremlins ate the other email chain. However, we are now past the 5 to 10 business days. And I don't have an answer on my personal email as well. So I have not given up. I'm willing to say maybe the 3 months was an email problem. Yeah, we're just over the 10 days. They said if they were backlogged, but I am not going to rest. Even if ultimately they tell me what I said was dead wrong, and that's fine. I will tell everybody and their grandmother exactly what this answer is. But I thought I fixed it with the email issue, Sherry, and yet I still don't have an answer.
So stay tuned, and also stay tuned to the proposed rule and all the things that are going to be coming out about Oasis E1 guidance. It might get answered in there. So all those things can be addressed when they come out. Okay, so we had an interesting question about the 24-hour rule for inpatient status. Are we looking at the actual order that was created when they went into the inpatient facility or when they came out of the facility? Some folks are having issues with their EMR systems, and this particular user had a problem with Medicare Advantage plans denying or telling them that they're not going to get paid because they didn't complete a transfer when it was a 24-hour or more movement to the inpatient status. Now, this is an ongoing issue in that we know that observation status has always been a problem in home health, and we found out some guidance that home health was going to be holding the bag when it came to the observation status in the hospital. Cindy, what do you say? How do you say is the best way to handle it for the inpatient transfer and when the transfer should and should not be completed?
So we do know that to bounce off what you just said, part of the problem has always been it's about them being technically admitted. So when they are in the status of admitted to the hospital, then we start that 24-hour clock. But we know that there's patients that have been in that hospital for 4 days. They never came out of admission status. So those are the ones that stayed in observation and they technically are not an inpatient admission, and we can't do a transfer because they never were technically admitted. But I think what I hear within this question, Sherry, is what we've seen, and I know the National Association of Home Care took this up specifically with Medicare Advantage programs that were attempting to deny it off of this 24-hour inpatient. That is a misinterpretation on their part of the rules. And Sherry, I think I sent it to you at one point. It was in our newsletter. I know that Mary Carr from NOC led that event, but really got CMS to basically say the Advantage plans can't do that. You can't. You are misreading the guidelines to turn around and try to tell me you're not going to pay for this. So more often than not, with Medicare Advantage, this is coming from an error on their end, not something that we're misreading the orders. Where I see us misreading it is yes, they were obviously in the hospital, and you go look at the records and everything on the referral, everything that came with it said observation status. Then they weren't. They technically are not, and it stinks. And there's entities out there, the Medicare advocacy groups, working hard to get this whole observation thing fixed because it's a loophole with many problems to it. But if it's tied to Medicare Advantage, as this question was, we can send that out again, Sherry. I can dig that up. But I know Mary Carr from NOC got a very clear answer and held the plans accountable that what they're doing was an overreach.
And even if you're not a member of NOC, if you reach out to Mary Carr, you can go onto their website and reach out to her directly. She's really good about answering these technical questions on timings and things like that with the answers that she's getting from CMS. And whatever happened, Cindy, and I don't want to get off on a tangent, but whatever happened to the quote unquote stub note? Basically, if you created a stub note or a communication that included all of the information that would go on to a transfer Oasis, you could have that information in real time to how they went to the hospital, what caused them to go to the hospital, all those things in a note that does not appear in your system. And that way you can wait to find out whether it was an admission or a non-admission or an observation, and use that information, which is accurate because it was done at the time that it occurred, and use that to complete your transfer oasis. I remember back in the day, we used to use stub notes or communication notes with really pertinent information all the time to create that timestamp. That's a recommendation. What do you think about that, Cindy, when you have those situations?
So in other words, using the communication features within the system to say, basically, this person went to this hospital on this day for this reason.
Mhm.
So we have it internally tracked. And then figuring out whether or not they ended up truly admitted. And then what are we doing? Are we doing a transfer and leaving the door open? Are we doing a transfer with a discharge? Or can we do neither because they stayed in observation status? But that way you're leaving essentially a placeholder of, I know full well, they went to this hospital on this day for this reason. We may now have to figure out, were they technically admitted or not
Yeah.
for the transfer purpose?
Exactly, and almost creating a electronic form that the clinician or whoever finds out about that transfer can fill out, so that you can have that accurate information when the time comes, if you do a transfer or not. And also, worst case scenario, you do a transfer and it was not needed. It can be rejected by the system when you go to submit your OASIS, because you would not have the corresponding resumption of care to coincide with that transfer. Also, if you were required to do a transfer and you did a resumption of care without the transfer, you can also get an error when you submit your OASIS time points at that point. So I think that there's some process issues that you can shore up to make sure that you're getting the correct information, but also not feel like you're holding the bag, and not having the correct information when you find out that you need to do that transfer document. I'm trying to be as clear as I can, but I hope that I'm not confusing folks with that. Okay, so we have a couple of questions that are really interesting questions, but they're super quick. So Cindy, are you ready?
I'm ready. It's like the rapid fire round.
Rapid fire, that's right. And I wanted to let people know that they can scan this QR code to get to the surveyor sets, but also a lot of this stuff that we talked about today is massive change. And just so happens that our home health leadership community is working on change management this month, in the month of March. So if you haven't yet joined the home health leadership community, please consider it. If you're finding that you're overwhelmed with some of the things that you have to, the messages that you have to give to your staff, some of the things that you have to roll out in your agency, this is a great group of professionals that get together and discuss things, and also have tasks that they do to improve their leadership skills. Change management is crucial. You're not behind if you join the community today. So I hope that you have the opportunity to do that. Okay, Cindy, rapid fire. Can
Yep.
OT and PT co-treat during a home care visit? How does that get documented and billed?
Yes, they can, as long as we are very clear that we were there for two different purposes. You can't have a second skill discipline there just to be a second set of hands. So if PT and OT are working on a task together with the patient, and PT is assessing the mobility element and OT's addressing some of the other components of it, the documentation has to speak to the skilled need for both. It can never be, this is a very large patient and I need someone else to hold them up. Another therapy discipline is not the one to do that. The clearest example for me is a personal one in my history was co-treating with speech, because I would be working on standing and standing balance, and speech wanted to assess if voice production was stronger in that position versus seated or lying down. And so it was clear that we were looking at two different perspectives on the same activity, but it wasn't just, I need somebody to hold them up.
And I've used the same thing in helping with stroke victims, and having them in a challenging posture, i.e. high kneel or half kneel, and having the occupational therapist work on neurocognition and coordination, fine motor, while they're in that challenging posture. So those kinds of things absolutely can happen. I think that the scrutiny, if you put in the exact times, because oftentimes there's a dovetailing, if you will, of those services, but having that opportunity to work together many times can make the difference between a big jump in the ability of your patient So I think that it's crucial that you consider that, but it's really important that you document it correctly.
And Sherry, I enjoy that question because I've been on a run of we don't let PT and OT go the same day ever because, and it's like, wait a minute, I understand trying to touch, spread out the interactions with the patient, but if the patient situation warrants same day or co-treat, we should be doing that.
Exactly. Okay, next one, rapid fire. Can you include documentation time in your visit, even if you are not in the presence of the patient?
Okay. How far away are you not in the presence? We know that we aren't paid per visit by Medicare. They pay us episodically. And that, time spent doing documentation during that visit is not excluded. We're not monitoring this down to the minutia. So let's say I finish this visit. I've been doing some of the documentation there. I go out to the car. I spend maybe 5 minutes or so still on the driveway, wrap up my thoughts on this. Yes, you could. Can I drive myself home and then try to say, well, I spent 15 more minutes on this patient, so I stick 15 minutes back to that patient and somehow attach it to that visit and make it look like it was a longer? Obviously, no, I cannot do that. So the reason it's not excluded, the way I see it, is our ability to take notes to self during the visit and take that few minutes immediately after to capture those thoughts creates more accurate documentation than doing none of it until 10 o'clock at night. So that's in terms of the presence of the patient is the physical presence. I'm still on the property for a few minutes. I would argue if you sat on the driveway for 30 minutes doing it, that's a stretch. But if it's, I did it way later, then clearly we're well outside the presence and no, it wouldn't count.
And again, documenting in front of the patient is the most accurate documentation that you will get on a patient. And many of you are scratching your head because you beat this issue to death with your clinicians, and still you have resistance to taking their documentation device even into the home with them. I suggest, again, this is one of those change things and one of those leadership moments. It's really crucial that they do that and include the patient in their documentation, include their actual words or their actual input and how the service impacted them that day. That patient engagement is crucial, and it's very tough to do a patient engaged documentation note when you're at home at 10 o'clock at night and you forgot what the patient said. So super important that happens. Even if you get there, it's baby steps. It's kind of like that statement, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Make that one bite and ask your clinicians to take that documentation device into one patient a day and then slowly progress that up. But that's something that Cindy, we like to say that some things in home health need to die. One of the things that needs to die is that resistance to documenting in front of the patient.
Well, quick sidebar, not to hijack. I think part of the issue, Sherry, is we can understand that conceptually of managing a patient in an episode and that we're not paid per visit. But we also know that productivity still remains measured by visit. And so I think that contributes to the, what time counts and what time doesn't count with a visit. As far as CMS is concerned, they're not tracking. I mean, that's not the reimbursement factor other than the LUPA issue. But I think when we've cut out so much time, then we end up producing 20-minute visits, 25-minute visits, and then complaining, oh gosh, I spend 4 hours at night documenting. If I did some of that during the visit, then my visit time would reflect more of the time I'm spending on this patient, because documentation is a critical element of that, than blasting through visits and then trying to do it all documentation at the end of the day.
Exactly. Next question. Can a temporary licensed therapist work in home health?
I am deferring that, Sherry, to state specific issues. Anytime you're dealing with licensure is state specific, and some of them leave it open to interpretation. Others have having served on a state specific licensing board before, it was a very eye-opening experience to kind of be like, why isn't it all the same? Why are we insisting that you can do this here but not over there? So I never want to say, oh, sure, or absolutely not. I would defer it back to look at your State Practice Act, your licensure board. Licensure boards are generally pretty good about if what you're reading and checking isn't clear, it doesn't land one way or the other, then I would take that question directly to your discipline specific licensure board.
100%. And also there are some compacts between states.
Mm.
And so there are states that are allowing other clinicians from other states to practice in their state without getting that state license. So all of that should go to the State Practice Act Board. And I would email them or call them directly and ask that question when you run into that. Okay, next one, interesting one here. Can we initiate a plan of care via telehealth, then proceed with treatment based on that plan of care?
Okay, Sherry, I'm gonna defer the bulk of that one to you. I just want to tee you up with my thought, okay? The issue is, can I, in my brain, and you can just tell me I'm wrong, crazy, or getting too old, should I? Because the idea of I didn't actually, I wasn't in your physical presence. I've used some sort of remote technology to gather information about you to make a plan. And then I'm going to do these things. I don't know, maybe I'm old. That stuff makes me nervous in terms of, and maybe it's a therapist who thinks there's no way I'd be okay thinking I did a full assessment of your abilities watching you through a screen because there's nuance pieces. But I'm curious, as a former agency owner, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, considering when I opened my agency, we were still on Blackberries. I think I think the technological aspect of this has grown exponentially. But Cindy, the minute I read that question, that was the first thought in my mind is why. And so I would proceed extremely cautiously and have a really good solid reason why that initial visit couldn't be made in person. And that initial assessment when you need to do evidence-based testing on that individual to make it be appropriate. That is super important to understand when it comes to telehealth versus in person. Telehealth can be used in home health and it can be used to progress an exercise plan if you already know the patient. But I think starting off with telehealth, when you need to do those evidence-based measures, that can get very, very risky. And I would caution against it, but proceed cautiously if that's something that you want to do. Couple of questions have come in, Cindy, and we've got about 5 more minutes, but I put up our slide in case there's some we cannot get to today. Please, please, please send them to our email. We will get to those ASAP on our email, but we want to be very respectful of everyone's time. Here, delay in a start of care question. Going back to OASIS, I think these are super important. We need to confirm a new start of care date with the patient within 48 hours of receiving a complete referral. How can we do that when the providers are hard to reach or don't reply quickly? Can we leave a message on the provider's office saying that the patient has asked for a delay, that we have a new start of care date, XYZ? If they have objections, should they call us back by the end of the day? Otherwise, we will use the new start of care date. Is this a valid way to handle this?
Okay, so what I think is happening is we're seeing surveyors, recent surveys, coming down pretty hard on timely initiation of care. And we know that current staffing situations have been impacting our ability to initiate care right away. So I think some of this is coming from not that I want to change the date. I'm trying to juggle the staff I have available and prioritize these patients to get them all ultimately admitted, but in the safest way possible. That is where we have to keep the focus in terms of why does the physician have to be part of this? So let's say I call the patient, and because this used to happen all the time to me as a PT, Sherry, call them on a Friday and I'd get the whole, I just got out of the hospital, I don't want to do therapy till next week. Okay, I haven't met you. We just talked about the telehealth POC. I've never laid eyes on you. I don't know what your home situation is in reality. I know you told them you have a caregiver and grab bars and everything else when you left the hospital, but I've been at this too long to know that that's a shower curtain, a towel rod, and a daughter that leaves in 2 days. So, okay, you want this. I'm not saying I'm going to go kick your door in, but the doctor who ordered it needs to be made aware of this change and agree to it, because they may know something I don't. They may say, no, next week is not good enough. They need to be seen sooner. Or it could be a wound issue. It could be no, I want them seen sooner. Now I understand the majority of people will say, That doesn't happen. The doctor ordered home care. I don't think they really care when it starts, which is why so many of them are date of referral and not physician ordered start of care date. So if they just said do it whenever, do they really care if it's 24 hours longer, 48 hours longer next week? We can't frame it with doctors don't return my phone calls and they don't care anyway. It is a patient safety issue that says the person whose order I had to have to do it expects this done by the rules within 48 hours of receipt of a completed referral. If something changed it, if the patient doesn't want this, the daughter, the facility, whatever, the doctor has to agree with us moving this date. And so that step of getting that communication needs to occur because we don't really have all the information about this patient yet. The idea that I can just leave a message and call me back if this bothers you, the old way we used to do quite a few orders, is why we ended up with an OASIS question that says you only get to say yes to clinically significant medication issues is if they actually got back to you at the end of the next calendar day. If it's 2 days later, you got to put no because they did not get back to you timely. And we used to do that with, oh, I'm going to do this. Just call me back if you disagree. You don't know if they ever got the message. You don't know if they ever read it or looked at it or listened to it. So a non-response is a dangerous response. You don't really have one. So what I'm seeing is more of, can we manage this if it truly is a staffing issue, or are we talking to these patients sooner at that intake process to catch the, okay, realistically, we can't start therapy until Tuesday. Hey, you're still in here. Are you okay with this? Can we cut this off right now with the physician and get an updated order right away? In talking with the patient about their expectations, if we find out they really don't want to do this till next week, can we head this off potentially in intake? But the issue is we do have that 48-hour window. And if something pushes it out of that, we have to have the paper trail the physician has signed off on it. And so when I see Sherry sometimes, and I literally saw it in a chart within the last week, the intake put the note, the doctor isn't returning our phone calls, just put the start of care date as the physician ordered start of care date. You can't do that. You can't say that we're just decided that whenever you get there, that's now the physician ordered start of care date. And openly put in your documentation, you never got a hold of them. That's not going to work.
And we're seeing a lot of scrutiny and a lot of ADRs running around. And I just think everybody should really button this up and make sure that they have a good paper trail and a good communication log of when they called. And make sure that that's something that is at the forefront of their documentation, that several attempts were made, what time those attempts were made, all those wonderful verbal order type documentations that you're supposed to do. You need to make that very clear. Cindy, do you have any closing thoughts as we circle around to the last minute?
I think we're in exciting times. We get to this part of the year and we're kind of in the finally past, the major holiday lull. We're finding our footing in the new year, and then we wait for the shoe to drop of the next proposed rule in the next few months. But I think, things like that change in the interpretive guidelines is a big thing. If you take a look at them, there's some other interesting ones with respect to the infamous therapy only admits that do read about OT admitting Medicare patients. We do know that there's legislative issues and possible movement on making this a whole permanent OTs and admissions and qualifying service, things that you've been putting in our newsletter, Sherry. So more to come in paying attention to that. But I do want to very briefly, because I don't want to assume everybody's been on all of these calls, and we had a couple comments come in about what did you ask Medicare about 1860? Briefly, what I asked is when we have the unique patient situation where the person is able to do all surfaces in their environment, they're going up and down stairs, they're going out on their driveway, all throughout their house. I have no safety concerns for them, absolutely whatsoever. Most likely this is the discharge. They're wonderful with a walker. I know that walker two-handed device is a response too, but this doesn't align with respect to what their abilities really are. And I framed it with, if you look at bathing, a 0 and a 1 are equally as independent in bathing. The only difference is equipment. And with bathing, they don't say, is it a tub seat or a transfer bench? So why would it be in 1860 that this person, and again, only when I'm talking about runs the streets with a walker, why would they not be a 1? Because by process of elimination, 0 isn't it because they have equipment, but 2 refers to intermittent assistance, and there's been some Q&As that sort of kind of address it, but I want to know in that situation, fully independent on a walker, is it a 1? Because it seems that it is. So I don't know if I kicked the hornet's nest or they don't know how they want to answer or nobody's gotten to it yet, but I'm going to keep pursuing it until I get some sort of resolution. This is not for all walkers. I mean, if somebody's using a walker and needs intermittent assistance, obviously that's a 2. If they need a continuous, it's a 3. But I'm looking at these discharge records on some of these patients that are running all over with the walker, and you're ending up at 2, which doesn't seem it's capturing the level of their ability.
So on that note, because I think you've stumped them, Cindy, I think that's exactly what's going on.
There's a comment, I just want to jump in, that they've already answered this question. Nope, I've read those Q&As. And they refer to use of a walker. And I'm saying, okay, we're not talking about within the home. We're saying someone at the same capacity you've attributed in response 1 that is doing all of their services in their environment, no human intervention, no supervision, no need for anything. So clearly that's not a whole bunch of our patients. But it seems that your ability to do that with a cane is rewarded. And if it's a walker who's running right next to Mr. Kane, has the same abilities, just a different piece of equipment, why would they get penalized with a different answer?
I might be the only one that just pictured a cane versus walker race.
Yep.
And oftentimes the walker would win, especially a 4-wheeled walker, right? They would
Oh
probably.
gosh, they need speed limits on some of these people.
Exactly. Thanks everyone for attending this month's session. Our next one will be May 23rd at 1 p.m. and you'll receive the information on how to register for that in the email that you get with this recording as soon as it's available. And one of our attendees just said they can picture the race as well. I think we can make big money on that. Anyway, so be prepared to get that information via email. It'll also go out in our newsletter tomorrow, and it'll also be on our YouTube channel. So make sure that you access the recording, and thanks again for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next time, May 23rd, 1 p.m. Eastern.